Now, we've used our FZR as a track bike for many years. Had a lot of track days on it, a lot of fun, of course. It's been a great street bike, but it's got about 10,000 miles on the set of plugs that's in there now. It's starting to run a little rough, and it's time to change the plugs. So to mention some of the things that might be useful to know about spark plugs. Back in the old days, when you had air-cooled motorcycles, the spark plug sat right out on top of the engine. If it was a two-stroke, you almost always carried some spare plugs with you because they fouled the plug. For whatever reason, back in the day, that was not a big deal. Now, as bikes have evolved, and the R1 is a good example, to change the plugs is a relatively big deal. Some of the bikes, it's an enormous big deal. Number one, you have to take bodywork off. You have to take the tank off. You have to take the airbox off. You have to get at the plugs. And because the bikes now, as you take an engine and water cool it, the plugs get deeper into the engine. Put overhead cams, the plugs keep getting further and further away from where they're easily accessible. Now, all of the air-cooled bikes, plugs right out on top, 5-minute job to get them. Water-cooled bikes, usually a little bit more complex, but not terrible. And a bike like the FZR can be pretty intimidating. And it's usually, in the case of the FZR, it's usually about, I go get a set of brand new plugs, put it up on the back stand, and I've got about an hour's work before I'll even see the spark plugs, because the tank has to come off, the seat, the airbox, an awful lot of stuff has to come off just to get at the plugs. And then what I need to have is one of the 3 special wrenches. I have to take the coils off the bike to get down at the plugs. Now, I wanted to show some of this because a lot of people might be, and it's not really as difficult as it seems. It's just a lot of labor. And every one of the parts, the seat comes right off the bike, the tank comes right off. We have a quick disconnect because we've used this as a track bike. It's got a lot of features that make it easy to do this, but basically, it's pretty much, as many times as I've done, it's pretty much an hour of fooling around to get everything. And then I like to, while I have it apart, clean everything up, wipe everything down. And so let me get started on that, because also Bob Navola was going to stop by. He wanted me to make some special bolts up for his bike. He's retrofitting his new VFR with the special controls he needs. And we've been trying to help him along with that project. Now, another thing, and as long as I'm saying this, let me, this is our old track bike here. This is one of the reasons I know this. If you just take any bike, you ride it on the street, so you go for a nice cruise, maybe go through the gears a few times, you'll never even know if you need spark plugs. It won't be obvious. On some of these bikes, the older bikes, you almost never need a plug because they only ran maybe 7,500, 8,000 RPM, and you really didn't run them hard, is what I'm saying. Now, a bike like the Kawasaki is a good example of a bike we run hard. We run it high up in the RPM range, and it's a rock solid bike. It really is nice to keep it up in a high RPM range. But what happens is, as you get higher and higher into the RPM range, if you notice a miss, it's almost always the plugs. Another way you can tell, leave it in 5th gear, find the biggest hill you can find, and maybe at 100, a little over 100, whatever the top speed of the bike is, hold it wide open, and if you hear a little bit of a miss, a lot of bikes only miss under a really high load. Now, this bike has over 10, I just looked at the log, over 10,000 on this set of plugs, which was used, the last time we changed them was used at a track day. So, it's time to change the plugs. Last time I rode it, I noticed I was shooting video with the camera paraphernalia, and what I noticed was, hey, it's got a little bit of a miss in it. Now, you know what? If you just didn't ride it as hard as we do, it'll run fine. It starts right up and idles nice, but that little extra edge, and as Luciano has so correctly said, nothing is better than a new set of tires and a new set of plugs, or both. In this case, we're going to ultimately, maybe during the week, change the front tire. We're ready on a tire soon. And a new set of plugs. I always remember, it just such a nice little improvement over having a set of plugs that's marginal. So let me get started on this, and maybe you could pick up some tips, or if you have an air-cooled bike, you probably already have the plugs changed while I'm sitting here drinking coffee and trying to get ready to do this project. Now this is a little baby tip, but I may as well put these things, as many as I can, on the videos. This bike doesn't have spools. The way you jack the back up is you run a rod through the axle. It's a hollow axle. And because the rod sticks out quite a bit, obviously you could cut this off. But I leave it long because I use it for other things in the shop where I need a long rod. But when it sticks out far, you can see how far it sticks out past the muffler. When you don't have something on the end of this, I remember from being at Vince's, we were doing some work on one of his bikes, and he was working and I was videotaping, I don't remember. And this rod, he has the similar thing. It stuck out, and I suggested wrap a rag around it, a little piece of black tape, because if you walk by in the heat of battle or in the heat of changing plugs, or somebody comes over, we're expecting Bob to come over, what'll happen is you catch your knee on that, or your knuckle, or your nose or something if you're laying on the ground. That's a nice little tip. That's something. Or you can obviously cut the rods, but then you don't have the long rod to use. And like I said, we do use that for other projects. Now this is something I always do. Anytime I change the plugs on any bike, I take the old plugs out, I mark which cylinder they came out of. This was done in May. This is the other bike. This is the 750, but I just wanted to show an example. It was done at 18,000, and what the plugs looked like. I can see if any of the cylinders are going bad, any are burning oil or whatever. The same thing with any of the bikes. I have all of the plugs that I've ever changed on any of the bikes. I keep them as a way of checking. We were running rich, and I've made changes to the raising or lowering the needles, various things that we've done to make the bike better at a track day. But by having this, I call it the history. I can look back at the history of this bike and see when we first got it, or the 750, or the R1 that I've already changed the plugs, and I have a little piece of cardboard. It takes me 30 seconds to do this, and I just store it. And then I can tell, as an example, if in the very beginning of having this bike, let's use this one for an example. These are the FZR plugs. When I was doing track days with this constantly, what would happen? It was running rich, and to ride it on the street, it would be rough and rumbly. Well, I leaned it out by lowering the needles. It ran much better on the street. And the plugs, on the time after this, they came out the color they should, a lighter brown. But for a track day, that's fine. But it's always good to have the history of the bike. In this case, it doesn't take up a lot of room in your closet or in your attic or whatever to have this. I wanted to mention, all my bikes, I have a log book. I have the original manuals. And pretty much all the maintenance I've ever done going back, all the oil changes, all the tire changes for each one of the bikes. And then what I have is an updated page that what I've done recently, so I can see when I've changed oil, new plugs, new filters for each one of the bikes. And this is a nice, easy way to keep track of the maintenance, not just the oil changes, plug changes, tire changes. And I always want to have, in the case of the R1 especially, because some of the electronic things, you really need the manual to get them straightened out. At least I do. Anyway, just some tips I thought I'd put on before we open up the bike. And this next thing, it's just pretty cut and dry. Done this a lot of times. Now, almost all the sport bikes come apart pretty much the same, similar in a similar way anyway. But a small tip, what I do is I start at one end of the wall, and as I take the bike apart, here's the bolts on the floor that belong with the seat. The next part, the next part, the next part. Then when I go to put it back together, and we did this with Glenn's Ducati, we laid out the parts in order, and then when you go to put them back, it just makes it a little bit easier. Unless you're a professional mechanic, you do this every day. That tends to help you figure out the sequencing of the bike and which bolts go where. Just makes it a lot easier. But again, this is something, if you're going to have a bike and ride it hard and want it to run like on a razor edge like I do, well, this is just part of the game. Now, another good tip, if you're unsure the first time you take a bike apart that you haven't worked on, another good trick is take out a camera, digital camera especially good, and take a picture of, for instance, where that hose goes, where that connector goes, where that wire goes, where the plugs go, the bolts, the cotter pins, or whatever. And if you take it apart in sequence, which is what I'm doing, and have pictures, for instance, at the end of it, if you didn't know where did that wire wind up, or where did that go, and we had, again with Glenn's Ducati, we learned a lot when we had the engine out. We really learned how valuable those pictures were to put a lot of the stuff back. Sequential pictures and having the parts laying in a line, it just minimizes the chance you're going to put it all back together and have 2 bolts left over, or 4 bolts, or the engine or something. Another thing I do that a lot of people don't do is, while I have this apart, see, this is not exposed normally, I take a rag with some other spray wax on it and just try to clean up any of the dirt or grime or anything, just so it's easier and nicer to work on. And in the case today, it's going to be really important because at some point in time we're going to have the airbox off. The carbs are going to be wide open to the atmosphere. I don't want any of this dirt or residual whatever, bugs, dead mice, whatever, go. I definitely don't want anything. This bike has downdraft carburetors, and they're vulnerable until you get the airbox bolted back on. Another little tip I've learned is, especially on this bike, to get to the quick disconnect fuel line, it's down inside. And so here's the problem. You need 3 hands to get it to somebody to hold the tank up, and you need to snake your hand in there and hit the quick disconnect part. What I've found works pretty good is a rubber hammer. One of the best accessories you can buy for your bike, if you're going to do your maintenance like this, is a quick disconnect fuel line. If you don't have this, right now you'd be unscrewing the fuel line from the petcock, and it guarantees a whole bunch of fuel is going to fall down into the engine. With this, you do get a drop, maybe 2 drops, maybe no drops, I don't know, but these are about 15 bucks. You push the button, they come apart without making a mess, especially if you're doing any track days or you're doing your own maintenance. That's another tip worth its weight in gold. Now, there's a lot of things that make a difficult job easier. One of them is, if you know you're going to do maintenance, you're going to do plugs, you're going to do any maintenance on the engine, valve adjustment, whatever, is the last time you ride it, run it almost out of fuel. In this case, probably there's half a gallon of fuel in here, but what it does, it makes, let me pull the pin in the front, and again, this bike, because we've used it for a track bike, you got to be able to do this maintenance relatively easy. Out goes the rubber hammer, and now, I lied, there's probably a whole gallon in here. That thing weighs 100 pounds. Who did that? Anyway, that is true. It really is a good idea if you can get the minimum amount of fuel while you're working on this. Or what you should do if you forget, take a rubber hammer and hit yourself on the hand so next time you remember. Now again, on bikes with downdraft carburetors, you want to be careful not to drop anything in there, of course, or any bike, it really doesn't matter. But that's why this part of the engine I've already cleaned many times as I've had the bike apart or just done general maintenance on it. This is a trick worth its weight in gold. I took these screws, and they come when you buy the bike, or if they come from the factory, even the R1, I'm not sure about the R1, but some of the Japanese bikes have Phillips screws that they're a soft, mushy Home Depot kind of screw, probably a grade 5. And the heads strip and you can't tighten them and it's a pain. I've replaced them for about $1. They're about a quarter a piece when you buy them from Bolt Depot with Allen screws, which make this part of the job an absolute piece of cake. And let me show, because these have to be, when you put this back, these have to be in exact alignment to avoid any interference with the throttle cable. So they have to be about right there, but then you've got to check the throttle cable. But the fact that they're Allen bolts, if these are Phillips and they start to strip and you can't loosen them, you're in a world of hurt. $1 makes it you just saw what I did. $1 makes your life very easy. BoltDepot.com. Now, another thing I always do is, because I am always fooling with the pilot settings and the needle settings, and it's very difficult. It is an extremely difficult job to get these carburetors off. To get to the screws, you need a special wrench. Really difficult job. So when I do it, I like to know I'm going to get it done right the first time. And so what I did, every time I make an adjustment, I put what the last adjustment I made is, because to get to these, I have to get a screwdriver under here and put a mirror under here to work on them. Still, not impossible to do, but it's not a garden variety job. Now to get the plugs out, we have to take here the coils. I have to pull this whole section apart, and I can get down in here, now I call it the black hole in space, to get that special wrench with a flex joint on it, and get one plug at a time out. See, here's what the reason I like to shoot the video for my friends. A lot of people would get to this point and be intimidated and say, oh, I can't get in there. Oh, it's a problem. Oh. Well, you know, a lot of these things are intimidating, but if you just knuckle down, they're not intimidating at all. Everything is predictable. I have all the tools that I've used, all the bolts in the sequence, all the parts that have come off the bike in the sequence they came off the bike. And now it's going to get a little trickier. It's just going to be a little trickier because I have to pull the coils out. There's a little rubber gasket in there. It's a couple of screws. And then I have to go down in and get the plugs out. But these are the kind of things, once you do them once, second time you do them, you're not intimidated at all. And I emphasize, if you see, I've always kept the engine, the part of the engine you don't even see, relatively clean, just because I like to have, when I work on things, I don't want to have dirt and grit and all that stuff falling in there. And if you were in doubt, you could roll up a paper towel. Maybe we'll do that just to cover each one up so we don't drop a bolt in there or a screw or whatever. That's probably cheap insurance. I used to have these nice little, they look like golf balls that fit right in there, but I don't know where they are. I'll just use paper towels for today. Now, I'll be sure not to mention any names, but I had a friend who worked on his, and I think it was a Yamaha 350, but I'm not sure, and put it all back together, went out for a test ride, and it didn't run at all. It was terrible. It was even hard to start. And the first thing I did when I took the air cleaner off, pulled the boot back, the paper towel was, one of them was half in there. So I want to be careful. Now the reason what would happen if you drop a bolt in there or who knows what, the way you find out what is you try doing it the difficult way and you'll find out right away what falls in there. But because we have a relatively clean engine area, that should minimize that. But not everybody has a clean engine bay, that's for sure. Keep in mind, this is a 26-year-old motorcycle, so what I like to do, as long as I have it apart, again, a little bit of this is ordinary brake cleaner. Don't want to get any on the paint. This is the trick of tricks. A stick with a point cut into it, wrap an old microfiber around it. You can get down into the places. Takes you 2 minutes to do this. And again, I keep using Glenn's Ducati as an example, but just like when you change the countershaft sprocket, if you clean it all up, you feel like you're working on a space shuttle instead of a garbage truck. Don't you love these analogies? I bet you're thinking, why doesn't he write comedy for a living? I'd starve to death. No, this is just one of the tips. Now, I know there's not a lot in here, but there's still a little bit of stuff. This allows you to get in places you never could get otherwise. And in the end, when you do this job, now when I'm ready to actually physically pull those plugs, which is the next thing, now I'm not working. All the grit is on the rag. I throw it in the washing machine. Much easier to do it no matter what bike you're working on, is to have a handful of zip ties around. Now you can see, here are the plugs way down in the black hole in space there. So I've got to get my special wrench. They make a special wrench for this with a universal joint. And it's a little bit tricky getting them in, but having this held up out of your way. I don't want to disconnect all these wires. I guess you could. Just these connections are solid, so I don't want to take a chance I pop. Remember, these are 25-year-old connectors. If they crack or break or whatever, who knows? It's just easier if you don't have to disconnect it. So I'll pull the caps off one by one. Do one plug at a time. And once you get this popped loose, of course, then getting these out is relatively straightforward. Once you get everything out of the way, and you do need a wrench with a universal joint to get down in there. Now by looking at that plug, it looks like we were still running very rich. Keep in mind, we could lean this out, but then in the winter it might not run as well. So basically we're not tuning for any weather condition. We just want to have it run as good as possible. And I think these are 8s. Yeah. Oh no, they're 9s. Okay, these are our track day plugs. So we're going to put 8s in it. 9s are colder. These would be good. These would be better, obviously, for racing application. 8s will be better for the street. Plugs in. The trick is you need this wrench with the universal joint. And what I did, because it's a cheese ball wrench, I put safety wire around it. This pin kept coming out. I tried to improve the tool, which, of course, you could always buy the more expensive wrench. Let's just get this hand tight. But without the wrench, good luck trying to get those plugs out. And actually, since this is something we have to do on a regular basis, I don't want to not have the right tool if possible. Once it's in place, I can snug it up. Again, none of these jobs should be intimidating. They're really pretty straightforward, in fact. 1 down, 3 to go. The whole secret is the tool. Right in the middle of everything, right in the middle of a plug change. Here he comes. What's up? You're still riding the old VFR. Where's the new one? Oy, oy, oy.
That's why I'm here, because the new one is working. It's actually working out well. I just have to get the parts.
What do you need, some bolts?
No, I need adapter fittings to fit the steel-braided lines into the existing brake lines.
All right, let's see if I got what did. He's got a bolt.
The parameter small is closed.
This is a bolt that goes into the swing arm, and it's stripped. So we need to figure out how we're going to either get a longer bolt, and you said it caught 2 threads before it's stripped?
Right. Now we're talking about the threads in the swing arm itself.
Okay, but that's usually what happens, because the swing arm's aluminum, right?
Yep.
All right, guess what? Let's see what happened here.
See, that's the threads there.
Okay. Yeah, you got no extra threads is what happened.
Right.
Okay, let's see what we can come up with. Bobby and we have the bolts. The bolts to replace it, no problem at all. We have a set of taps from Harbor Freight that has every size in the world that you need, except the one we need. So, when you buy these taps from Harbor Freight, that is the one thing. Don't think you're going to buy one. The size you need will not be in there. We made a tap out of a bolt. This is a grade 8 bolt, of course. And what this is going to do, because the swing arm we're repairing is aluminum, I carved flutes in it with a Dremel tool. Not sure. Let's see if you can see that. Turn it a little bit. You ever have an issue that you can't get the tap, and of course we have a box of Chinese taps that are all wrong. So to get this thread that this swing arm thing is on, I just cut this with a parting wheel. Make sure we don't have a burr on there. You're going to get one shot to do it. Then take some brake cleaner and get rid of the oil before you put the real screw in. Mm-hmm. And if it's a sloppy fit, if it's like this, put a drop of JB Weld in, put the bolt in, and go to sleep tonight. Cool. That'll work. As Bob leaves, this is the last time I want to see this bike. The next time I want to see this new VFR. Oh my God.
Maybe one more appearance next.
One more?
One more appearance next weekend.
Yeah, I hope we get to ride. Boy, oh boy. It's a nice day, but you know what? Nice days will be here forever. We're not getting old, we're getting younger. Oh, jeez. It's hard for me to...
See if it starts.
See if it starts. That's why I got the... Wow! This bike has stranded him several times on the road. A lot of guys have worked on it, including Vince, and but there's no substitute for just having some jumper cables and a couple of cars with a fresh battery around. All right, I'm going back to work. I got plugs to change. See you later, alligator. Now, with all the plugs changed, it does look like it's burning pretty equally here. And it's definitely burning rich. To me, anyway. But what's going to change, as soon as the weather cools off, that'll go back to being a little more like what it should be. Well, one of the things that you can just take some pride and joy in. Once you have these Allen screws in here, and this is a mistake I've made, is that these clamps that hold the carbs to the air box, as you tighten them, the clamps slide up and you don't get a good seal. So what I'm real careful about is that each one of the clamps is as low on the air box as it can go. And this is where this Allen thing really comes in handy. When you have these in Phillips screws, it can really make you nuts. Anyway, it was great to give Bob a hand with that, make him up a little tap, get his bike. I know pretty soon he'll be ready to go. And if you've picked up some little tips along the way, because most of these tips apply to almost any bike. Now when I'm done, I always make sure that air box is good and solid, because these clamps, they tend to ride up, and then if you lose the seal at, let's say at this carb, this isn't sealing, this cylinder is going to run lean. And that, of course, needless to say, can fry a valve or whatever, or make your pizza cold at the end of the night. I'm not sure. Anyway, all of those things, all of those little tips, the plugs are in, everything's tight now. We just got to reassemble a bike. And now this is what's handy about having the parts in order. I just go right down the line backwards, and probably within 10 minutes the bike will be back in one piece with nice fresh new plugs. Now as I'm reassembling this, I always look around. This is the kind of things I look for. Any wire that's rubbing has a squash spot on it, and I'll put a piece of black tape over it. Anything that could be loose, battery connections clean, no green stuff growing on the positive terminal, battery nice and tight. In here everything is nice and clean, ready for the next time we have to do any maintenance or whatever. It is ready for the reassembly. Now before I put the bike all back together permanently, I want to make sure I've got everything hooked up right. You might think that testing the engine is frivolous. It isn't. There's so many things you can do wrong. You can not hook up any of the things. You can forget to hook the fuel line up. You can forget to hook one of the plug wires up, or put the plug wires on backwards. Any number of things. But before I put all the bolts in now it's just a question of, we know the engine's going to start, it's going to run. Everything should be really, really good now. I'm really hoping this is really going to make a difference the next time we ride the bike. And we hope to get a lot more years. This is a 26-year-old bike. And I want to thank Luciano again for the day we bought this bike. If you only knew how cold it was, we paid a very little amount of money for it. And we have had more fun, more adventures, track days, riding around Bear Mountain. It has just been one of the best investments I've ever made. Now at the end of every day's project, I always like to look around, and I say it over and over again about how much fun I've been able to have, how much enjoyment, how many good rides I've got. I've got almost 17,000 miles on this bike since I bought it, and by doing a lot of the work myself, it's made it even more fun for me. And I've hoped the videos have been able to share things I've learned. And I always say at the end of a video, thank you for watching, which of course is true. I thank everybody that's watched my videos, enjoyed them, and shared them. But there's an even bigger thing. It's to thank the people that I've learned from, of which there are so many. The list goes on and on. I've learned from almost everybody I've ever known in my whole life. I've learned something. And I've always felt compelled that part of my obligation in learning it was to share it with you. So anyway, having said that, I'll thank you again for watching, and remember, just enjoy the passion of motorcycling, or enjoy the passion, whatever it is, whether it's model aviation, golf, tennis, or whatever. Because if you have that passion, I think you have a much better life.